The Double, read by Kairos of the Threefold Manifold. July 9th, 2025. Part 3. It was striking midnight from all the clock towers in Petersburg when Mr. Golyadkin, beside himself, ran out on the Fontanka Quay, close to the Ismailovsky Bridge, fleeing from his foes, from persecution, from a hailstorm of nips and pinches aimed at him, from the shrieks of excited old ladies, from the ohs and ahs of women, from the murderous eyes of Andrei Filipovich. Mr. Golyadkin was killed entirely, in the full sense of the word, and if he preserved the power of running, it was simply through some sort of miracle, a miracle in which, at last, he refused himself to believe. It was an awful November night, wet, foggy, rainy, snowy, teeming with colds in the head, fevers, swollen faces, quinsys, inflammations of all kinds and descriptions, teeming, in fact, with all the gifts of a Petersburg November. The wind howled in the deserted streets, lifting up the black water of the canal above the rings on the bank, and irritably brushing against the lean lampposts, which chimed in with its howling in a thin, shrill creak, keeping up the endless, squeaky, jangling concert in which every inhabitant of Petersburg is so familiar. Snow and rain were falling both at once. Lashed by the wind, the streams of rainwater spurted almost horizontally, as though from a fireman's hose, pricking and stinging the face of the luckless Mr. Golyadkin like 1,000 pins and needles. In the stillness of the night, broken only by the distant rumbling of carriages, the howl of the wind and the creaking of the lamp-posts, there was a dismal sound of the splash and gurgle of water rushing from every roof, every porch, every pipe, and every cornice onto the granite of the pavement. There was not a soul near or far, and indeed it seemed there could not be at such an hour and in such weather. And so only Mr. Golyadkin, alone with his despair, was fleeing in terror along the pavement of Fontanka, with his usual rapid little step, in his haste to get home as soon as possible to his flat on the 4th story in Shestelovachny Street. Though the snow, the rain, and all the nameless horrors of a raging snowstorm and fog under a Petersburg November sky were attacking Mr. Golyadkin, already shattered by his misfortunes, were showing him no mercy, giving him no rest, drenching him to the bone, gluing up his eyelids, blowing right through him from all sides, baffling and perplexing him, though all this was hurled upon Mr. Golyadkin at once, as though conspiring and combining with all his enemies to make a grand day, evening, and night for him. In spite of all this, Mr. Golyadkin was almost insensible to this final proof of the persecution of destiny. So violent had been the shock and the impression made upon him a few minutes before at the civil councillor Berendiev's. If any disinterested spectator could have glanced casually at Mr. Golyadkin's painful progress, he would instantly have grasped the awful horror of his pitiful plight, and would certainly have said that Mr. Golyadkin looked as though he wanted to hide from himself, as though he were trying to run away from himself. Yes, it was really so. One may say more. Mr. Golyadkin did not want only to run away from himself, but to be obliterated, to cease to be, to return to dust. At the moment, he took in nothing surrounding him, understood nothing of what was going on about him, and looked as though the miseries of the stormy night, of the long tramp, the rain, the snow, the wind, all the cruelty of the weather, did not exist for him. The galosh slipping off the boot on Mr. Golyadkin's right foot was left behind in the snow and slush on the pavement of Fontanka, and Mr. Golyadkin did not think of turning back to get it, did not, in fact, notice that he had lost it. He was so perplexed that, in spite of everything surrounding him, he stood several times stock-still in the middle of the pavement, completely possessed by the thought of his recent horrible humiliation. At that instant, he was dying, disappearing. Then he suddenly set off again like mad and ran without looking back, as though he were pursued, as though he were fleeing from some still more awful calamity. The position was truly awful. At last, Mr. Golyadkin halted in exhaustion, leaned on the railing in the attitude of a man whose nose has suddenly begun to bleed, and began looking intently at the black and troubled waters of the canal. There is no knowing what length of time he spent like this. All that is known is that at that instant Mr. Golyadkin reached such a pitch of despair, was so harassed, so tortured, so exhausted, and so weakened in what feeble faculties were left him, that he forgot everything. Forgot the Ismailovsky Bridge, forgot Sheshlovochny Street, forgot his present plight. After all, what did it matter to him? The thing was done. The decision was affirmed and ratified. What could he do? All at once, he started and involuntarily skipped a couple of paces aside. With unaccountable easiness, he began gazing about him. But no one was there. Nothing special had happened. And yet he fancied that just now, that very minute, someone was standing near him, beside him, also leaning on the railing, and, marvelous to relate, had even said something to him, said something quickly, abruptly, not quite intelligibly, but something quite private, something concerning himself. Why, was it my fancy? Said Mr. Golyadkin, looking round once more. But where am I standing? He thought finally, shaking his head, though he began gazing with an uneasy, miserable feeling into the damp, murky distance, straining his sight and doing his utmost to pierce with his short-sighted eyes the wet darkness that stretched all round him. There was nothing new, however, nothing special caught the eye of Mr. Golyadkin. Everything seemed to be all right, as it should be, that is. The snow was falling more violently, more thickly, and in larger flakes. Nothing could be seen 20 paces away. The lamp-posts creaked more shrilly than ever, and the wind seemed to intone its melancholy song even more tearfully, more piteously, like an importunate beggar whining for a copper to get a crust of bread. At the same time, a new sensation took possession of Mr. Golyadkin's whole being. Agony upon agony, terror upon terror, a feverish tremor ran through his veins. The moment was insufferably unpleasant. Well, it's no matter, he said to encourage himself. Well, no matter. Perhaps it's no matter at all, and there's no stain on anyone's honor. Perhaps as it should be, he went on without understanding what he was saying. Perhaps it will all be for the best in the end, and there will be nothing to complain of, and everyone will be justified. Talking like this, and comforting himself with words, Mr. Golyadkin shook himself a little, shook off the snow which had drifted in thick layers on his hat, his collar, his overcoat, his tie, his boots, and everything. But his strange feeling, his strange, obscure misery he could not get rid of, could not shake off. Somewhere in the distance there was the boom of a cannon shot. Ah, what weather, thought our hero. Tchoo! Isn't there going to be a flood? It seems as though the water has risen so violently. Mr. Golyadkin had hardly said or thought this when he saw a person coming towards him, belated, no doubt, like him through some accident. An unimportant, casual incident, one might suppose, but for some unknown reason, Mr. Golyadkin was troubled, even scared, and rather flurried. It was not that he was exactly afraid of some ill-intentioned man, but just that, perhaps, after all, who knows, this belated individual hashed through Mr. Golyadkin's mind. Maybe he's that very thing. Maybe he's the very principal thing in it, and isn't here for nothing, but is here with an object, crossing my path and provoking me. Possibly, however, he did not think this precisely, but only had a passing feeling of something like it, and very unpleasant. There was no time, however, for thinking and feeling. The stranger was already within 2 paces. Mr. Goyonkin, as he invariably did, hastened to assume a quite peculiar air, an air that expressed clearly that he, Goyonkin, kept himself to himself, that he was all right, that the road was wide enough for all, and that he, Goyadkin, was not interfering with any one. Suddenly, he stopped short, as though petrified, as though struck by lightning, and quickly turned round after the figure which had only just passed him, turned as though someone had given him a tug from behind, as though the wind had turned him like a weathercock. The passer-by vanished quickly in the snowstorm. He, too, walked quickly. He was dressed like Mr. Goyadkin, and like him, too, wrapped up from head to foot, and he, too, tripped and trotted along the pavement of Fontanka with rapid little steps that suggested that he was a little scared. What is it?" whispered Mr. Goyadkin, smiling mistrustfully, though he trembled all over. An icy shiver ran down his back. Meanwhile, the stranger had vanished completely. There was no sound of his step, while Mr. Goyadkin still stood and gazed after him. At last, however, he gradually came to himself. "Why, what's the meaning of it?" he thought with vexation. "Why, have I really gone out of my mind, or what?" He turned and went on his way, making his footsteps more rapid and frequent, and doing his best not to think of anything at all. He even closed his eyes at last with the same object. Suddenly, through the howling of the wind and the uproar of the storm, the sound of steps very close at hand reached his ears again. He started and opened his eyes. Again the rapidly approaching figure stood out black before him, some 20 paces away. This little figure was hastening, tripping along, hurrying nervously. The distance between them grew rapidly less. Mr. Goyadkin could by now get a full view of this second belated companion. He looked full at him and cried out with amazement and horror. His legs gave way under him. It was the same individual who had passed him 10 minutes before, and who now, quite unexpectedly, turned up facing him again. But this was not the only marvel that struck Mr. Goyadkin. He was so amazed that he stood still, cried out, tried to say something, and rushed to overtake the stranger, even shouted something to him, probably anxious to stop him as quickly as possible. The stranger did, in fact, stop 10 paces from Mr. Goyadkin, so that the light from the lamp-post that stood near fell full upon his whole figure, stood still, turned to Mr. Goyadkin, and with impatient and anxious face waited to hear what he would say. "Excuse me, possibly I'm mistaken," our hero brought out in a quavering voice. The stranger, in silence, and with an air of annoyance, turned and rapidly went on his way, as though in haste to make up for the 2 seconds he had wasted on Mr. Goyadkin. As for the latter, he was quivering in every nerve. His knees shook and gave way under him, and with a moan he squatted on a stone at the edge of the pavement. There really was reason, however, for his being so overwhelmed. The fact is that this stranger seemed to him now somehow familiar. That would have been nothing, though. But he recognized, almost certainly recognized, this man. He had often seen him. That man had seen him some time, and very lately, too. Where could it have been? Surely not yesterday. But again, that was not the chief thing that Mr. Goyadkin had often seen him before. There was hardly anything special about the man. The man at first sight would not have aroused any special attention. He was just a man like anyone else, a gentleman like all other gentlemen, of course. And perhaps he had some good qualities, and very valuable ones, too. In fact, he was a man who was quite himself. Mr. Goyadkin cherished no sort of hatred or enmity, not even the slightest hostility towards this man. Quite the contrary, it would seem, indeed. And yet, And this was the real point. He would not, for any treasure on earth, have been willing to meet that man. And especially to meet him as he had done now, for instance. We may say more. Mr. Gulyankin knew that man perfectly well. He even knew what he was called, what his name was, and yet nothing would have induced him, and again, for no treasure on earth, would he have consented to name him, to consent to acknowledge that he was called so-and-so, that his father's name was this, and his surname was that. Whether Mr. Gulyankin's stupefaction lasted a short time or a long time, whether he was sitting for a long time on the stone of the pavement, I cannot say. But, recovering himself a little at last, he suddenly fell to running, without looking round, as fast as his legs could carry him. His mind was preoccupied. Twice he stumbled and almost fell, and through this circumstance, his other boot was also bereaved of its galosh. At last, Mr. Gulyankin slackened his pace a little to get breath, looked hurriedly round, and saw that he had already, without being aware of it, run right across Fontonka, had crossed the Anichkov bridge, had passed part of the Nevsky Prospect, and was now standing at the turning into Latenya Street. Mr. Gulyankin turned into Latenya Street. His position at that instant was like that of a man standing at the edge of a fearful precipice, while the earth is bursting open under him, is already shaking, moving, rocking for the last time, falling, drawing him into the abyss, and yet the luckless wretch has not the strength nor the resolution to leap back, to avert his eyes from the yawning gulf below. The abyss draws him, and at last he leaps into it of himself hastening the moment of his destruction. Mr. Gulyankin knew, felt, and was firmly convinced that some other evil would certainly befall him on the way, that some unpleasantness would overtake him, that he would, for instance, meet his stranger once more. But, strange to say, he positively desired this meeting, considered it inevitable, and all he asked was that it might all be quickly over, that he should be relieved from his position in one way or another, but as soon as possible. And meanwhile he ran on and on, as though moved by some external force, for he felt a weakness and a numbness in his whole being. He could not think of anything. Those thoughts caught at everything like brambles. A little lost dog, soaked and shivered, attached itself to Mr. Gulyankin and ran beside him, scurrying along with tail and ears drooping, looking at him from time to time with timid comprehension. Some remote, long-forgotten idea, some memory of something that had happened long ago, came back into his mind now, kept knocking at his brain as with a hammer, vexing him and refusing to be shaken off. That horrid little cur, whispered Mr. Gulyankin, not understanding himself. At last he saw a stranger at the turning into Italiansky Street. But this time the stranger was not coming to meet him, but was going in the same direction as he was, and he too was running a few steps in front. At last they turned into Shestelovochny Street. Mr. Gulyankin caught his breath. The stranger stopped exactly before the house in which Mr. Gulyankin lodged. He heard a ring at the bell, and almost at the same time the grating of the iron bolt. The gate opened. The stranger stooped, darted in, and disappeared. Almost at the same instant, Mr. Gulyankin reached the spot, and like an arrow flew in at the gate. Heedless of the grumbling porter, he ran, gasping for breath, into the yard, and immediately saw his interesting companion, whom he had lost sight of for a moment. The stranger darted towards the staircase which led to Mr. Gulyankin's flat. Mr. Gulyankin rushed after him. The stairs were dark, damp, and dirty. At every turning there were heaped up masses of refuse from the flats, so that any unaccustomed stranger who found himself on the stairs in the dark was forced to travel to and fro for half an hour in danger of breaking his legs, cursing the stairs as well as the friends who lived in such an inconvenient place. But Mr. Gulyankin's companion seemed as though familiar with it, as though at home. He ran up lightly, without difficulty, showing a perfect knowledge of his surroundings. Mr. Gulyankin had almost caught him up. In fact, once or twice the stranger's coat flicked him on the nose. His heart stood still. The stranger stopped before the door of Mr. Golyadkin's flat, knocked on it, and, which would, however, have surprised Mr. Golyadkin at any other time, Petrushka, as though he had been sitting up in expectation, opened the door at once, and, with a candle in his hand, followed the stranger as the latter went in. The hero of our story dashed into his lodging, beside himself, without taking off his hat or coat. He crossed the little passage, and stood still in the doorway of his room, as though thunderstruck. All his presentiments had come true. All that he had dreaded and surmised was coming to pass in reality. His breath failed him. His head was in a whirl. The stranger, also in his coat and hat, was sitting before him on his bed, and with a faint smile, screwing up his eyes, nodded to him in a friendly way. Mr. Golyadkin wanted to scream, but could not, to protest in some way, but his strength failed him. His hair stood on end, and he almost fell down with horror, and indeed there was good reason. He recognized his nocturnal visitor. The nocturnal visitor was no other than himself, Mr. Golyadkin himself, another Mr. Golyadkin, but absolutely the same as himself. In fact, what is called a double in every respect. Chapter 6. At 8 o'clock next morning, Mr. Golyadkin woke up in his bed. At once all the extraordinary incidents of the previous day, and the wild, incredible night, with all its almost impossible adventures, presented themselves to his imagination and memory with terrifying vividness. Such intense diabolical malice on the part of his enemies, and, above all, the final proof of that malice, froze Mr. Golyadkin's heart. But at the same time, it was all so strange, incomprehensible, wild. It seemed so impossible that it was really hard to credit the whole business. Mr. Golyadkin was, indeed, ready to admit himself that it was all an incredible delusion, a passing aberration of the fancy, a darkening of the mind. If he had not fortunately known by bitter experience to what lengths spite will sometimes carry any one, what a pitch of ferocity an enemy may reach when he is bent on revenging his honor and prestige. Besides, Mr. Golyadkin's exhausted limbs, his heavy head, his aching back, and the malignant cold in his head bore vivid witness to the probability of his expedition of the previous night, and upheld the reality of it, and to some extent of all that had happened during that expedition. And indeed, Mr. Golyadkin had known long, long before that something was being got up among them, that there was someone else with them. But after all, thinking it over thoroughly, he made up his mind to keep quiet, to submit, and not to protest for the time. They are simply plotting to frighten me, perhaps, and when they see that I don't mind, that I make no protest, but keep perfectly quiet, and put up with it meekly, they'll give it up. They'll give it up of themselves, give it up of their own accord. Such, then, were the thoughts in the mind of Mr. Golyadkin, as, stretching in his bed, trying to rest his exhausted limbs, he waited for Petrushka to come into his room as usual. He waited for a full quarter of an hour. He heard the lazy scamp fiddling about with the samovar behind the screen, and yet could not bring himself to call him. We may say more. Mr. Golyadkin was a little afraid of confronting Petrushka. Why, goodness knows, he thought. Goodness knows how that rascal looks at it all. He keeps on saying nothing, but he has his own ideas. At last the door creaked, and Petrushka came in with the tray in his hands. Mr. Golyadkin stole a timid glance at him, impatiently waiting to see what would happen, waiting to see whether he would not say something about a certain circumstance. But Petrushka said nothing. He was, on the contrary, more silent, more glum, and ill-humored than usual. He looked askance from under his brows at everything. Altogether, it was very evident that he was very much put on about something. He did not even once glance at his master, which, by the way, rather piqued the latter. Setting all he had brought on the table, he turned and went out of the room without a word. He knows all about it, the scoundrel, Mr. Golyonkin grumbled to himself as he took his tea. Yet our hero did not address a single question to his servant, though Petrushka came into his room several times afterwards on various errands. Mr. Golyonkin was in great trepidation of spirit. He dreaded going to the office. He had a strong presentiment that there he would find something that would not be just so. You may be sure, he thought, that as soon as you go, you will light up something. Isn't it better to endure in patience? Isn't it better to wait a bit now? Let them do what they like there, but I'd better stay here a bit today, recover my strength, get better, and think over the whole affair more thoroughly. Then, afterwards, I could seize the right moment, fall upon them like snow from the sky, and get off scot-free myself. Reasoning like this, Mr. Golyonkin smoked pipe after pipe. Time was flying. It was already nearly 9:30. Why, it's 9:30 already, thought Mr. Golyonkin. It's late for me to make my appearance. Besides, I'm ill. Of course I'm ill. I'm certainly ill. Who denies it? What's the matter with me? If they send to make inquiries, let the executive clerk come. And indeed, what is the matter with me, really? My back aches, I have a cough and a cold in my head, and in fact it's out of the question for me to go out, utterly out of the question in such weather. I might be taken ill, and very likely die. Nowadays, especially, the death rate is so high. With such reasoning, Mr. Golyonkin succeeded at last in setting his consciousness at rest, and defended himself against the reprimands he expected from Andrei Filipovich for neglect of his duty. As a rule in such cases, our hero was particularly fond of justifying himself in his own eyes with all sorts of irrefutable arguments, and so completely setting his conscience at rest. And so now, having completely soothed his conscience, he took up his pipe, filled it, and had no sooner settled down comfortably to smoke, when he jumped up quickly from the sofa, flung away the pipe, briskly washed, shaved, and brushed his hair, got into his uniform, and so on, snatched up some papers, and flew off to the office. Mr. Golyonkin went into his department timidly, in quivering expectation of something unpleasant, an expectation which was none the less disagreeable for being vague and unconscious. He sat timidly down in his invariable place next to the head clerk, Anton Antonovitch Sietochkin. Without looking at anything or allowing his attention to be distracted, he plunged into the contents of the papers that lay before him. He made up his mind and vowed to himself to avoid, as far as possible, anything provocative, anything that might compromise him, such as indiscreet questions, jests, or unseemly allusions to any incidents of the previous evening. He made up his mind also to abstain from the usual interchange of civilities with his colleagues, such as inquiries after health and such like. But evidently it was impossible, out of the question, to keep to this. Anxiety and uneasiness in regard to anything near him that was annoying always worried him far more than the annoyance itself, and that was why, in spite of his inward vows to refrain from entering into anything, whatever happened, and to keep aloof from everything, Mr. Golyonkin, from time to time, on the sly, very, very quietly, raised his head and stealthily looked about him to right and to left, peeped at the countenances of his colleagues, and tried to gather whether there were not something new and particular in them, referring to himself, and with sinister motives concealed from him. He assumed that there must be a connection between all that happened yesterday and all that surrounded him now. At last, in his misery, he began to long for something, goodness knows what, to happen, to put an end to it, even some calamity. He did not care. At this point, Destiny caught Mr. Golyadkin. He had hardly felt this desire when his doubts were solved in the strangest and most unexpected manner. The door leading from the next room suddenly gave a soft and timid creak, as though to indicate that the person about to enter was a very unimportant one, and a figure very familiar to Mr. Golyadkin stood shyly before the very table at which our hero was seated. The latter did not raise his head. No, he only stole a glance at him, the tiniest glance. But he knew all. He understood all, to every detail. He grew hot with shame, and buried his devoted head in his papers with precisely the same object with which the ostrich, pursued by hunters, hides his head in the burning sand. The new arrival bowed to Andrei Filipovich, and thereupon he heard a voice speaking in the regulation tone of condescending politeness with which all persons in authority address their subordinates in public offices. "Take a seat here," said Andrei Filipovich, motioning to the newcomer to Anton Antonovitch's table. "Here, opposite Mr. Golyadkin, and we'll soon give you something to do." Andrei Filipovich ended by making a rapid gesture that decorously admonished the newcomer of his duty, and then he immediately became engrossed in the study of the papers that lay in a heap before him. Mr. Golyadkin lifted his eyes at last, and that he did not fall into a swoon was simply because he had foreseen it all from the first, that he had been forewarned from the first, guessing in his soul who the stranger was. Mr. Golyadkin's first movement was to look quickly about him, to see whether there was any whispering, any office joke being cracked on the subject, whether anyone's face was agape with wonder, whether, indeed, someone had not fallen under the table from terror. But to his intense astonishment, there was no sign of anything of the sort. The behavior of his colleagues and companions surprised him. It seemed contrary to the dictates of common sense. Mr. Golyadkin was positively scared at this extraordinary reticence. The fact spoke for itself. It was a strange, horrible, uncanny thing. It was enough to rouse anyone. All this, of course, only passed rapidly through Mr. Golyadkin's mind. He felt as though he were burning in a slow fire. And indeed, there was enough to make him. The figure that was sitting opposite Mr. Golyadkin now was his terror, was his shame, was the nightmare of the evening before. In short, it was Mr. Golyadkin himself, not the Mr. Golyadkin who was sitting now in his chair with his mouth wide open, his pen petrified in his hand, not the one who acted as assistant to his chief, not the one who liked to efface himself and slink away into the crowd, not the one whose deportment plainly said, "Don't touch me, and I won't touch you," or "Don't interfere with me. You see I'm not touching you." No, this was another Mr. Golyadkin, quite different, yet at the same time exactly like the first, the same height, the same figure, the same clothes, the same baldness. In fact, nothing, absolutely nothing was lacking to complete the likeness, so that if one were to set them side by side, nobody, absolutely nobody, could have undertaken to distinguish which was the real Golyadkin, and which was the counterfeit, which was the old one, and which was the new one, which was the original, and which the copy. Our hero was, if the comparison can be made, in the position of a man upon whom some practical joker has stealthily, by way of jest, turned a burning glass. What does it mean? Is it a dream? He wondered. Is it reality, or the continuation of what happened yesterday? And besides, by what right is this all being done? Who sanctioned such a clerk? Who authorized this? Am I asleep? Am I in a waking dream? Mr. Golyadkin tried pinching himself, even tried to screw up his courage to pinch someone else. No, it was not a dream, and that was all about it. Mr. Golyadkin felt that the sweat was trickling down him in big drops. He felt that what was happening to him was something incredible, unheard of, and for that very reason was, to complete his misery, utterly unseemly. For Mr. Golyadkin realized and felt how disadvantageous it was to be the first example of such a burlesque adventure. He even began to doubt his own existence, and though he was prepared for anything and had been longing for his doubts to be settled in any way whatever, yet the actual reality was startling in its unexpectedness. His misery was poignant and overwhelming. At times he lost all power of thought and memory. Coming to himself after such a moment, he noticed that he was mechanically and unconsciously moving the pen over the paper. Distrustful of himself, he began going over what he had written and could make nothing of it. At last, the other Mr. Golyadkin, who had been sitting discreetly and decorously at the table, got up and disappeared through the door into the other room. Mr. Golyadkin looked round. Everything was quiet. He heard nothing but the scratching of pens, the rustle of turning over pages, and conversation in the corners furthest from Andrei Filipovitch's seat. Mr. Golyadkin looked at Anton Antonovitch, and, as in all probability our hero's countenance fully reflected his real condition and harmonized with the whole position, and was consequently, from one point of view, very remarkable, good-natured, Anton Antonovitch, laying aside his pen, inquired after his health with marked sympathy. "I'm very well, thank God, Anton Antonovitch," said Mr. Golyadkin, stammering. "I am perfectly well, Anton Antonovitch. I'm all right now, Anton Antonovitch," he added uncertainly, not yet fully trusting Anton Antonovitch, whose name he had mentioned so often. "I fancied you were not quite well, though that's not to be wondered at. No, indeed. Nowadays, especially, there's such a lot of illness going about. Do you know—" "Yes, Anton Antonovitch, I know there is a lot of illness. I did not mean that, Anton Antonovitch," Mr. Golyadkin went on, looking intently at Anton Antonovitch. "You see, Anton Antonovitch, I don't even know how you— that is, I mean to say, how to approach this matter, Anton Antonovitch." "How so?" "I really— do you know— I must confess, I don't quite understand. You must explain. You know in what way you are in difficulties," said Anton Antonovitch, beginning to be in difficulties himself, seeing that there were actually tears in Mr. Golyadkin's eyes. "Really, Anton Antonovitch, here, there's a clerk here, Anton Antonovitch." "Well, I don't understand now." "I mean to say, Anton Antonovitch, there's a new clerk here." "Yes, there is. A namesake of yours." "What?" cried Mr. Golyadkin. "I say, a namesake of yours. His name's Golyadkin, too. Isn't he a brother of yours?" "No, Anton Antonovitch, You don't say so. Why, I thought he must be a relation of yours. Do you know, there's a sort of family likeness." Mr. Golyadkin was petrified with astonishment, and for the moment he could not speak. To treat so lightly such a horrible, unheard-of thing, a thing undeniably rare and curious in its way, a thing which would have amazed even an unconcerned spectator, to talk of a family resemblance when he could see himself as in a looking-glass. "Do you know, Yakov Petrovitch, what I advise you to do?" Anton Antonovitch went on. "Go and consult a doctor. Do you know, you look somehow quite unwell. Your eyes look peculiar. You know, there's a peculiar expression in them." "No, Anton Antonovitch, I feel, of course. That is, I keep wanting to ask about this clerk." "Well, that is, have you not noticed, Anton Antonovitch, something peculiar about him? Something very marked?" That is, I mean, Anton Antonovitch, a striking likeness with somebody, for instance, with me, for instance. You spoke just now, you see, Anton Antonovitch, of a family likeness. You let slip the remark. You know, there really are sometimes twins exactly alike, like two drops of water, so that they can't be told apart. Well, it's that I mean. To be sure, said Anton Antonovitch after a moment's thought, speaking as though he were struck by the fact for the first time. Yes, indeed. You're right. There is a striking likeness, and you are quite right in what you say. You really might be mistaken for one another, he went on, opening his eyes wider and wider. And, you know, Yakov Petrovitch, it's positively a marvelous likeness. Fantastic, in fact. As the saying is, that is, just as you... Have you observed, Yakov Petrovitch? I wanted to ask you to explain it. Yes, I must confess, I didn't take particular notice of it at first. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful. And, you know, you are not a native of these parts, are you, Yakov Petrovitch? No, he is not from these parts either, you know, either. Perhaps he comes from the same part of the country as you do. Where, may I make bold to inquire, did your mother live for the most part? You say, Anton Antonovitch, that he is not a native of these parts? No, he is not. And indeed, how strange it is, continued the talkative Anton Antonovitch, for whom it was a genuine treat to gossip. It may well arouse curiosity, and yet, you know, you might often pass him by, brush against him, without noticing anything. But you mustn't be upset about it. It's a thing that does happen. Do you know, the same thing, I must tell you, happened to my aunt on my mother's side. She saw her own double before her death. No, excuse my interrupting you, Anton Antonovitch. I wanted to find out, Anton Antonovitch, how that clerk... That is, on what footing is he here? In place of Semyon Ivanovitch, to fill the vacancy left by his death. The post was vacant, so he was appointed. Do you know, I'm told dear Semyon Ivanovitch left 3 children, all tiny dots. The widow fell at the feet of His Excellency. They do say she's hiding something. She's got a bit of money, but she's hiding it. No, Anton Antonovitch, I was still referring to that circumstance. You mean... to be sure. But why are you so interested in that? I tell you not to upset yourself. All this is temporary to some extent. Why, after all, you know, you have nothing to do with it. So it has been ordained by God Almighty. It's His will, and it is sinful repining. His wisdom is apparent in it, and as far as I can make out, Yakov Petrovitch, you are not to blame in any way. There are all sorts of strange things in the world. Mother Nature is liberal with her gifts, and you are not called upon to answer for it. You won't be responsible. Here, for instance, you have heard, I expect, of those, what's their name? Oh, the Siamese twins that are joined together at the back. Live and eat and sleep together. I'm told that they get a lot of money. Allow me, Anton Antonovitch. I understand. Yes, but what of it? It's no matter, I tell you. As far as I can see, there's nothing for you to upset yourself about. After all, he's a clerk. As a clerk, he seems to be a capable man. He says that his name is Golyadkin, that he's not a native of this district, and that he's a titular councillor. He had a personal interview with His Excellency. And how did His Excellency? It was all right. I'm told he gave a satisfactory account of himself, gave his reasons, said, "It's like this, Your Excellency," and that he was without means, and anxious to enter his service, and would be particularly flattered to be serving under His Excellency. All that was proper, you know. He expressed himself neatly. He must be a sensible man. But of course he came with a recommendation. He couldn't have gotten in without that. Oh, from whom? That is, I mean, who is it had a hand in this shameful business? Yes, a good recommendation, I'm told. His Excellency, I'm told, laughed with Andrei Filipovitch. Laughed with Andrei Filipovitch? Yes, he only just smiled and said that it was all right, that he had nothing against it, so long as he did his duty. Well, and what more? You relieve me to some extent, Anton Antonovitch. Go on, I entreat you. Excuse me, I must tell you again. Well, then come, it's nothing. It's a very simple matter. You mustn't upset yourself, I tell you. And there's nothing suspicious about it. No, That is, Anton Antonovich, I want to ask you, didn't His Excellency say anything more? About me, for instance. Well, to be sure. No, nothing of the sort. You can set your mind quite at rest. You know, it is, of course, a rather striking circumstance, and at first, why, here for instance, I scarcely noticed it. I really don't know why I didn't notice it till you mentioned it. But you can set your mind at rest entirely. He said nothing particular, absolutely nothing, added good-natured Anton Antonovich, getting up from his chair. So then, Anton Antonovich, Oh, you must excuse me. Here I've been gossiping about these trivial matters, and I've business that's important and urgent. I must inquire about it. Anton Antonovich? Andrei Filipovitch's voice sounded, summoning him politely. His Excellency has been asking for you. This minute. I'm coming this minute, Andrei Filipovitch. And Anton Antonovich, taking a pile of papers, flew off first to Andrei Filipovitch, and then to His Excellency's room. Then what is the meaning of it? Thought Mr. Golyadkin. Is there some sort of game going on? So the wind's in that quarter now. That's just as well. So things have taken a much pleasanter turn. Our hero said to himself, rubbing his hands, and so delighted that he scarcely knew where he was. So our position is an ordinary thing. So it turns out to be all nonsense. It comes to nothing at all. No one has done anything, really, and they are not budging, the rascals. They are sitting busy over their work. That's splendid, splendid. I like the good-natured fellow. I've always liked him, and I'm ready to respect him. Though it must be said, one doesn't know what to think, this Anton Antonovich. I'm afraid to trust him. His hair's very gray, and he's so old he's getting shaky. It's an immense and glorious thing that His Excellency said nothing and let it pass. It's a good thing. I approve. Only why does Andrei Filipovich interfere with his grins? What's he got to do with it, the old rogue? Always on my track, always like a black cat on the watch to run across a man's path, always thwarting and annoying a man, always annoying and thwarting a man. Mr. Golyadkin looked around him again, and again his hopes revived. Yet he felt that he was troubled by one remote idea, an unpleasant idea. It even occurred to him that he might try somehow to make up to the clerks. To be the first in the field, even, perhaps, leaving the office or going up to them as though about his work. To drop a hint in the course of conversation, saying, "This is how it is. What a striking likeness, gentlemen. A strange circumstance, a burlesque farce." That is, treat it all lightly, and in this way sound the depth of the danger. Devils breed in still waters, our hero concluded inwardly. Mr. Golyadkin, however, only contemplated this. He thought better of it in time. He realized that this would be going too far. That's your temperament, he said to himself, tapping himself lightly on the forehead. As soon as you gain anything, you are delighted. You're a simple soul. No, you and I had better be patient, Yakov Petrovitch. Let us wait and be patient. Nevertheless, as we have mentioned already, Mr. Golyadkin was buoyed up with the most confident hopes, feeling as though he had risen from the dead. No matter, he thought. It's as though 100 tons has been lifted off my chest. Here is a circumstance, to be sure. The box has been opened by lifting the lid. Krylov is right, a clever chap, a rogue, that Krylov, and a great fable writer. And as for him, let him work in the office, and good luck to him so long as he doesn't meddle in or interfere with anyone. Let him work in the office. I consent and approve. Meanwhile, the hours were passing, flying by, and before he noticed the time, it struck 4. The office was closed. Andrei Filipovich took his hat, and all followed his example in due course. Mr. Golyadkin dawdled a little on purpose, long enough to be the last to go out when all the others had gone their several ways. Going out from the street, he felt as though he were in paradise, so that he even felt inclined to go a longer way round, and to walk along the Nevsky Prospect. To be sure, this is destiny, thought our hero, this unexpected turn in affairs. And the weather's more cheerful, and the frost and the little sledges. And the frost suits the Russian. The Russian gets on capitally with the frost. I like the Russian. And the dear little snow and the first few flakes in autumn. The sportsman would say, it would be nice to go shooting hares in the first snow. Well, there, it doesn't matter. This was how Mr. Golyadkin's enthusiasm found expression. Yet something was fretting in his brain. Not exactly melancholy, but at times he had such a gnawing at his heart that he did not know how to find relief. Let us wait for the day, though, and then we shall rejoice. After all, you know, what does it matter? Come, let us think it over. Let us look at it. Come, let us consider it, my young friend. Let us consider it. Why, a man's exactly like you in the first place, absolutely the same. Well, what is there in that? If there is such a man, why should I weep over it? What is it to me? I stand aside, I whistle to myself, and that's all. That's what I laid myself open to, and that's all about it. Let him work in the office. Well, it's strange and marvelous, they say, that the Siamese twins... but why bring in the Siamese twins? They are twins, of course, but even great men, you know, sometimes look queer creatures. In fact, we know from history that the famous Suvorov used to crow like a cock. But there, he did all that with political motives, and he was a great general. But what are generals, after all? But I must keep myself to myself, that's all, and I don't care about anyone else, and secure in my innocence, I scorn my enemies. I am not one to intrigue, and I'm proud of it. Genuine, straightforward, neat and nice, meek and mild. All at once, Mr. Golyadkin broke off. His tongue failed him, and he began trembling like a leaf. He even closed his eyes for a minute, hoping, however, that the object of his terror was only an illusion. He opened his eyes at last and stole a timid glance to the right. No, it was not an illusion. His acquaintance of that morning was tripping along his side, smiling, peeping into his face, and apparently seeking an opportunity to begin a conversation with him. The conversation was not begun, however. They both walked like this for about 50 paces. All Mr. Golyadkin's efforts were concentrated on muffling himself, hiding himself in his coat, and pulling his hat down as far as possible over his eyes. To complete his mortification, his companion's coat and hat looked as though they had been taken off Mr. Golyadkin himself. Sir, our hero articulated at last, trying to speak almost in a whisper, and not looking at his companion. We are going different ways, I believe. I am convinced of it, in fact, he said after a brief pause. I am convinced, indeed, that you quite understand me, he added, rather severely, in conclusion. I could have wished, his companion pronounced at last. I could have wished. No doubt, you will be magnanimous and pardon me. I don't know to whom to address myself here. My circumstances. I trust you will pardon my intrusiveness. I fancied, indeed, that, moved by compassion, you showed some interest in me this morning. On my side, I felt drawn to you from the very first moment. At this point, Mr. Golyadkin inwardly wished that his companion might sink into the earth. If I might venture to hope that you would accord me an indulgent hearing, Yakov Petrovitch. We, here, we, you had better come home with me, answered Mr. Golyadkin. We will cross now to the other side of the Nevsky Prospect. It will be more convenient for us there, and then by the little back street. We'd better go by the back street. Very well, by all means let us go by the back street, our hero's meek companion responded timidly, suggesting by the tone of his reply that it was not for him to choose, and that in his position he was quite prepared to accept the back street. As for Mr. Golyadkin, he was utterly unable to grasp what was happening to him. He could not believe in himself. He could not get over his amazement. I thank you all for joining me here today. Please do give us a like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the things that help this channel grow, sustain itself, and hopefully make a bit of a difference by checking out literature, games, and helping to foster a community there around. If you didn't like it, let me know. Give me feedback, give me critique. I could always use it, and if you want to do that, you can always do so right here on the video, or check out my social media at Twitter, Spotify, Bitchute, YouTube, the Discord server at the Threefold at a Factory, or even over on TikTok. And if you did happen to like it enough to think that it is worthy of some monetary support, there is a one-time donation that you can offer, linked by Streamelements in the description. Or if you want something a little bit more recurring and access to some very cool features, starting at $5, there is a Patreon, also linked in the description. And without further ado, I hope that you all never miss your opportunities.